I got the dream job abroad, but my partner refused to move, and now we're both questioning our future together. Update: I searched online for hours, but came up with almost nothing. His social media was long since abandoned. No recent posts, no LinkedIn, nothing. Finally, after some digging, I found an old forum post where someone mentioned that he moved to a small town a few hours away, and that was my first lead. Meanwhile, I decided to test Mark. I acted really casual and natural, told him I was going on a spa holiday with my mother. After I left, I drove straight to Ryan, my last known location. What I found was shocking. Ryan was no ordinary man leading a quiet life. He was a wreck. I found him in a seedy bar, barely recognizable. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, his hands shaking as he drank at 11 a.m. When I walked up and said his name, he looked pale as a ghost. At first he tried to walk away, but I begged him to talk to me. I told him everything about Mark, the ring, the strange timeline. When I mentioned the ring, he really flinched, as if hearing about it hurt him physically. Then he said something that sent shivers down my spine. He told me that he was your fiancé, but I had no idea who he was. I felt my blood run cold. I asked him what he meant, and that's when Ryan finally broke down and admitted that about a year ago Mark had contacted him, claiming to be engaged to me and wanting to use her ring as a memento of Emma. But Ryan had no idea who Mark was and had never heard of him before. I told Ryan this was impossible. Mark and I had been together for years, but Ryan shook his head, swearing that he had never met him before then, and then he dropped the bombshell. Mark didn't just pass the ring. He manipulated him into giving it to Ryan. Mark had appeared at his house uninvited, acting very friendly. He said he just wanted to connect because we had both lost someone we loved. At first, Ryan thought it was sweet, but then Mark started showing up more and more uninvited, and he started digging into Emma's past, asking strange questions about their relationship, and it felt a little off. One night, Ryan woke up to find Mark breaking into his house. He was obviously terrified, but Mark didn't seem worried at all. He just smiled and said, "You've kept her here long enough. It's time to let her go." Ryan was terrified. He didn't know what Mark was capable of, but he desperately wanted to get him out of the house. When Mark told him that the only way to continue was to get rid of Emma's engagement ring, which Ryan had given him just to get him to leave, Ryan was terrified. I was shaking with fear. Mark had lied to me, but what scared me most was that I had actually been living with this person, sleeping next to him every night, without knowing who he really was. I thanked Ryan and went home. Mark was waiting for me for dinner and acted completely normal. I played along, but inside I was screaming. That night I decided to investigate further. I waited until Mark fell asleep and then took his phone. My hands were shaking so much that I could hardly enter his password, but when I did, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Hundreds of deleted photos of Emma, photos I had never seen before, photos of her childhood, her university days, even pictures of her with Ryan. It was like he had built a shrine on the phone. Then I found the worst picture of all, a picture of me wearing a ring, except there was no title underneath, no my name, but Emma's. I barely made it to the bathroom before I threw up. Not only was my fiancé obsessed with my dead sister, but he also thought I was her. I didn't know what to do, confront him or run away. I felt like I was living in a horror movie, and I just realized that I was the main character. Update: I wish I could tell you that I packed my bags and left there and then. I wish I could say that I was smart enough to run away as soon as I realized that my fiancé was not only a liar, but also had a deep and terrible obsession with my dead sister. But I didn't. Instead, I froze. I sat in the bathroom, staring at the photo with my name and Emma's name, and it felt like my world was falling apart. Every memory, every moment I had with Mark suddenly became tainted. I wasn't his fiancé, I was just a replacement. And the worst part was, I didn't know how obsessed he was. I decided to keep up the act. If Mark got paranoid and thought I was Emma, I would just leave. If Mark got paranoid and thought I was Emma, I would feel unsafe leaving. What would he do if I suddenly stopped playing along? So I swallowed my fear, put his phone back where I found it, and climbed into bed next to him as if nothing had happened. The hardest part was acting normal. The next morning, I kissed him on the cheek with a smile and asked him to make me coffee as usual, but inside I was screaming. Every little thing he did gave me goosebumps. He pushed my hair behind my ears and muttered, "You look just like her today." I did my best not to react, and then something even more disturbing happened. I tried to act like a normal person at work, even though I was having a nightmare. When I got a call from an unknown number, it was Ryan. His voice was shaking. "You need to get out of there," he told me. After I left, I started thinking about Mark's behavior, how he was so persistent in trying to unlock Emma's memories of how he was hell-bent on getting her ring. So Ryan started investigating, and the results shocked me. Mark knew Emma, not just through me, not just through Ryan. They met 7 years ago, before she died. Ryan managed to pull up a few old photos from their college days. Mark was in the background at a party with Emma. I almost fainted. Mark had told me that he had never met Emma and had never even lived in the same city as us, but photos don't lie. Then Ryan said something that almost made me drop the phone. This wasn't the only photo I found. I found another one from the night she died. My hands were shaking when I clicked on the link. It was a group photo. Emma was in the middle, smiling at the camera, surrounded by her friends. But standing half-hidden in the shadows behind her is Mark, looking at her. I can't breathe. He was there the night she died. Emma's death was ruled an accident. She fell off a bridge after a party. There were no witnesses, just a few friends who said she'd been drinking and left the party alone. But now I'm not so sure. I have to go. I tell Ryan I'm packing up and leaving. That night, he told me to be careful and offered to drive and pick me up, but I told him I would manage. I didn't want to wait, but of course things didn't go according to plan. Mark came home early. I was panicking as I stuffed things into my bag when I heard the front door open and my heart almost stopped. I had left work early, thinking I had at least a few hours, but there he was standing in the doorway looking at me. I forced a smile and said, "You're home early." He didn't smile back. His gaze flicked to the half-empty bag on the bed. "Where's?" I was so dry my mouth felt like sand. I tried to cover it up by saying I'd just been tidying up, but he didn't move, just stood there staring at me with an inscrutable expression. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me a photo I'd taken from outside the office building earlier that day. He'd been spying on me. I knew then that I wasn't just in danger, I was in deep trouble. I couldn't escape because he was still suspicious. I could only think of one way out, so I walked up to him, kissed him softly, and told him I had a surprise for him that evening. The surprise seemed to catch him off guard. He smiled and his suspicions eased slightly, but inside he was screaming. I only had one chance to escape. I waited until he went to take a shower, grabbed my bag, and ran. I didn't even start my car. I knew he would track it down. I ran along the street, hailed the first taxi, and told the driver to take me anywhere. Now I was safe, but it wasn't over yet. I went to a friend's house and planned to go to the police first thing in the morning. But I knew it wasn't over yet. Mark was dangerous, and now I had to find out the truth. Did Mark kill my sister? Update 3: I wasn't just dealing with an obsessed man, I might be dealing with a murderer. The worst thing is that he knows what happened after I ran away. I stayed at my friend Julia's apartment all night. She is the only person I completely trust. She saw my face and didn't ask any questions. She just let me in and locked the door. But I couldn't sleep. I sat on her sofa staring at my phone, waiting for Mark to call or text, but he didn't. No desperate messages, no voicemails asking where I was, no threats. Just silence, which scared me more than anything. The police were useless. The next morning, I reported the incident to the police, explaining everything, how Mark had lied about knowing Emma, how he had manipulated Ryan into giving him the ring, how I had found the photos, and how he had followed me. The officer took notes, but didn't seem to care much. He said Mark hadn't really committed a crime yet, that stalking was hard to prove, and that breaking into Ryan's house was illegal, but Ryan had never officially reported it. I told them that I think Mark may be involved in Emma's death, that he was there the night she died. The officer sighed and leafed through his notes. Her case was ruled an accident. Yes, I wanted to scream. They told me they would look into it and advised me to get a restraining order if Mark contacted me. Then they told me to leave, as if I had just reported Ed stealing a bicycle. That night, Mark finally contacted me at 3 a.m. I got a text message. Mark said, "Come home, Emma, baby. Don't come home." "Where are you?" "Come home, Emma." I threw the phone away as if it had burned me. I picked it up with shaking hands and stared at the words. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't autocorrect. He was calling me by the name of my dead sister's name. I knew then that if the police weren't taking this seriously, I had to find out the truth for myself. I went to Ryan and told him everything. The police ignored me. Mark texted me and said he'd had a crush on Emma long before she died. Ryan looked so miserable. Then he said, "I think I know someone who can help us." We went to Emma's best friend. Her name was Claire. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not because we had a bad relationship, but because after Emma died, she moved away and we lost touch. I always thought it was just grief, but when Ryan and I found her, she let us in and before we could say anything, she burst into tears and sobbed. I knew this would happen again, I knew it wasn't over, and my blood ran cold. Claire asked us to sit down and told us something that changed everything. 7 years ago, a few months before Emma died, Mark had been stalking her. Claire remembered Emma mentioning a man who made her feel uncomfortable, but she never named him. She just said that the man was always around, always finding excuses to run into her on campus, always watching her. Emma dismissed it, thinking it was just a stranger who had a crush on her. However, just a week before her death, she told Claire that she was scared and said that she had seen the man outside her apartment. Outside the apartment, he no longer just followed her, but was waiting for her. And then the worst happened. Claire hesitated, gripping the cup so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Then she said, "Emma told me his name." My whole body tensed. CLA looked me in the eye and whispered his name was Mark. I almost vomited. Mark had been stalking Emma before she died, which meant her death was more than just an accident. We checked the police report, and Ryan and I drove straight to the local archive. CLA refused to come with us. She was shaking so badly she said she didn't want to relive it. We rummaged through Emma's files, my hands shaking as I went through them, and then I found something that took my breath away. A witness statement. Someone had reported seeing a man on the bridge the night of the MFL. The description was tall, dark hair, in his 20s. It could have been anyone, but my gut told me it was Mark. Then, as I sat there staring at the report, I got another text. My phone rang again. "Mark, you shouldn't go digging." Mark came home. Emma, and then the final text. "Mark, or I'll make you." I threw the phone away. Ryan grabbed it and read the text, his face going pale. I turned to look at him. My heart was in my throat. I had to end this. Ryan nodded, we both agreed, because now we knew the truth. Mark was not only obsessed with Emma, he had killed her, and now he was coming for me. I would not run away again. I didn't know what would happen next, but this had to end. Mark thought he was in control, and I was too afraid to fight back, but he was wrong, because now I knew the truth, and I would make sure he never hurt anyone again. Update 4. In that moment, everything fell apart. Mark is in custody, and I should feel safe, but somehow it's gotten worse, because now that I know the truth, it's even worse than I thought. I need to tell you everything, and every moment is terrifying and heartbreaking. Mark showed up after I got his last text, or I'll make you like Ryan. I knew we were running out of time. The police had already turned me down, but now we had new evidence. Claire's testimony, the witness reports, and the hard evidence that Mark had been stalking Emma before she died. Ryan and I planned to go to the police station the next morning, but Mark had other plans for the night. Just after midnight, he showed up at Julia's apartment. Ryan and I were in the living room when we suddenly heard a tapping sound on the window. Julia's apartment was on the 3rd floor, with no balcony and no fire escape. My heart raced as he stared at me from the window. I screamed, and Ryan jumped up and knocked over a chair, but Mark didn't move. He just smiled. In the dim light of the street lamp, I saw something that made me shudder. He was holding a rope in his hand. Ryan grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the door. We ran into Julia's bedroom, locked the door and called the police, but before we could explain, there was a loud crash and Mark had broken the window. Julia woke up screaming. Ryan picked up the table lamp and stood in front of me, and Mark climbed back into the house. The glass creaked under his boots, but his face was strangely calm. "You shouldn't have left," he said. I was so stiff that I could hardly move. He didn't sound angry, but sad, as if I had let him down. I could hardly speak. "Mark, you have to go. The police are here." His smile did not waver. "I didn't come for you, Emma." Emma, it wasn't me. Emma, that was when I knew that Mark was no longer living in reality. He had lost his tenuous grip on sanity. He didn't recognize me. He believed I was her. Ryan didn't wait. He charged at Mark and smashed the table lamp over his shoulder. Mark stumbled back, but he was strong too, and he quickly recovered, grabbing Ryan by the collar and slamming him hard against the wall. I heard the drywall crack. Julia was still screaming. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy candlestick, and smashed it over Mark's head. He swayed, and blood dripped from his eyes and fell in a single drop onto his temple. I thought that would be enough to slow him down, but he turned to me and grinned. "It's okay," he muttered. "I know you can't remember yet, but you will. I'll help you remember, Emma." I couldn't breathe. Mark reached into his overcoat, and my mind screamed, but what he pulled out was even more terrifying, a syringe. He was going to drug me. I rushed towards Ryan, who was still in a daze, but Julia grabbed a baseball bat from under the bed and swung with all her might, and it hit Mark in the ribs. The ribs made a sickening cracking sound, and he let out a muffled grunt, bending over. This gave me just enough time to grab Ryan and escape. We barely had time to make it to the hall before we heard sirens. Mark was arrested, but that wasn't the end. The police burst in, guns drawn. Mark didn't resist, he just laughed, even when they forced him to the ground and handcuffed him. "You don't understand," he told the police. "She's mine. She's always been mine." I was shaking so badly I could hardly stand. Julia clung to me, sobbing. Ryan was bleeding from the head, but still insisted on standing to make sure I was okay. They shoved Max into the back of a patrol car, and just before they slammed the door, he looked straight at me. They discovered something shocking. Emma's autopsy report showed that her cause of death was accidental drowning, but the scar from the small puncture wound in her neck, which had been overlooked before, made me feel sick. Just like he tried to do to me, Mark drugged her. But that wasn't all. When they searched his apartment, they found a hidden room in the wall, covered in pictures of Emma, some from her university days, some from when we were kids, and a box of her things, including her hairbrush, scarves, old letters, her diary. And page after page about her, about his love for her, his plans for them. At the bottom of the box was an engagement ring, not the one he gave me, but another one. Mark had planned to propose to Emma, but she didn't know it and didn't want him, so he took her when she rejected him. He killed her. The final blow. The last piece of evidence came from his phone. Deleted text messages were recovered by the forensic team. Messages he sent to himself. Fake conversations. Pretending it was Emma. Pretending she loved him. Even after she died. Even after he was with me. He never saw me as me. He tried to make me into her. Now Mark is in prison, awaiting trial. The evidence is overwhelming. He'll never get out. But I still don't feel safe. Update 5. I can't believe I'm sitting here writing this, but life seems to have turned into a big joke. Things were supposed to get better. With Mark in prison, I thought the nightmare was finally over, but nightmares don't end when you wake up. They haunt you and come for you when you least expect it. The attack last week. Since Mark's arrest, I've felt like an empty shell. The police have been handling the case since the arrest, but I can't shake this feeling. I can't stop looking around, afraid he might suddenly appear. He's locked up, but the damage he's done is so great, I don't know how to go on living. I'm on my way home from therapy, and I'm feeling better. At least I try to tell myself that. The therapist says it'll take time, but honestly, How am I supposed to go on living after all that? How do you face the corner after all you've been through, without worrying that Mark might suddenly appear from behind? I took a shortcut through a quiet alley, just a few blocks from home. When I sensed something was wrong, the air seemed to change. Before I could react, a figure suddenly appeared, and a man grabbed me from behind. I couldn't scream. His hand covered my mouth, his body pressed against me. I couldn't move. His hand gripped my wrist, pulled me further into the alley. I struggled, my heart racing. It felt like everything. All the dark thoughts about Mark, about control, about fear, came to life. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt weak. But he pulled me up, picked me up like an object. I tried to fight back, but I was smaller, weaker. He was faster. I escaped, and that was the end of it. He pushed me against the wall, his hands still on me, but in a different way. He let go. I thought maybe this was my chance to break free, but instead of running, I froze. I froze. I don't even remember how long I stood there crying. I should have gone for help. I should have called the police. But I felt physically and mentally drained. I couldn't even concentrate. But it wasn't just fear, there was also a strange feeling that I couldn't explain. Deep down I had an indescribable feeling, a mixture of being violated and feeling sick. I don't know what made me so conflicted. Maybe it was the adrenaline, maybe it was the trauma, but part of me still wanted to go closer to him and feel his hands again. I feel guilty about this, and I don't even know if this is what is called love aggression syndrome. I know this sounds crazy, but my brain can't get rid of the image of him holding me tightly, and I can't get rid of the image of him controlling everything at that moment. The image is distorted, but it gives me an inexplicable comfort. I don't know what it means, and I don't know if I've broken down or if the trauma has turned me into another person, but I can't stop thinking about it. My health concerns are even more unsettling. I don't know if I'm safe, if I've caught something, if I'm carrying some disease, if I'll regret this situation in some unpredictable way. I went to the doctor immediately, and they gave me a thorough examination, including blood tests, but now I'm just waiting for the results. They say it'll take a few days. A few days of uncertainty. The worst part is, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel. Should I be concerned? Should I be more worried about the health risks or what just happened? Why I don't feel sick, why the thought of him wanting me again, not needing me, makes my skin burn with shame and confusion, but at least I know that the immense, pleasurable pleasure I felt when she entered me will stay with me forever.